In March 2022, I posted a video on strange things seen in the sky in 1561. It's a topic that I've been wanting to revisit ever since. That particular video is now archived due to the platform fighting me, but it did give me an excuse to take a new look at that topic. In April 1561, there was a strange event in the sky. A mass sighting of celestial phenomena that's become known as one of the earliest believed documented cases of UFO activity. But it wasn't the only one of its kind. The Middle Ages apparently had a few strange things seen in the sky. In a broadsheet news article created by printer Hans Glasser, there is a report describing an event that happened in April 1561, with text as well as an illustration. And the text goes like this. As the sun rose on April 14th, 1561, a dreadful apparition occurred on the sun that was seen by many men and women. As the sun rose in the sky, two blood-red semicircular arcs that looked like a half moon could be seen in the sun's center. Red and black globes were flanking it on all sides. These globes were all of various sizes and formations. Some were in a line, and some were in a square, though some of the globes were alone as they all moved around the sun. In the middle of all of these globes were what is described as blood-red crosses. Also seen in the sky were blood-red strips, shapes that looked like big rods. As people watched, all of these celestial shapes appeared to fight each other, flying in and out of the sun. This sky battle lasted for about an hour before they fell from the sky as if they all burned, hitting the earth in a cloud of immense smoke. The last thing that was seen in the sky looked like a black spear, the shaft to the east, with the point to the west. The report ends with Glasser speaking about God and admonishing the reader to obey God. "5 years after the reported sighting of this sky battle, there would be a series of strange events in the sky that shocked the citizens of Basel during the summer of 1566. Like the event in 1561, these events would be described in a broadsheet written by Samuel Aperius and Samuel Cocchius. According to this report, the whole thing began on July 27th, 1566, as the sun was setting. As people watched, the sunset became dimly lit before it suddenly turned a vivid reddish orange and seemed to weep tears of blood. The sun appeared no bigger than the full moon. This strange event would continue into the next day, where the residents would awake to a blood-red sky on July 28th, 1566. This phenomenon lasted throughout the day before things seemingly returned to normal. Then, in the morning of August 7th, large black globes were seen in the sky. These objects appeared to be locked in some kind of battle. They flew across the sky at great speeds and would glow a fiery red color before they seemed to disintegrate across the sky. Around 100 years later, there would be another strange sighting in the sky. This one was a bit different from the others, because this story apparently did not end with just this strange event that was seen in the sky. April 1665, 6 fishermen claimed to have witnessed an aerial battle in the skies above the Baltic Sea near Stralsund. as the men watched, a flock of birds took the form of a ship in the sky. This ship was then followed by several other ships of various sizes. As these other ships arrived, a battle would break out in the sky over the Baltic Sea. The part that would frighten these men the most was what happened after the battle, because then a large, dark object would appear and hover in the sky. This object was flat and round and looked like a large hat to the men observing it from below. This dark object would hover right over the church of Saint Nikolai and would remain stationary over the church until late in the evening. Some reports say that there were several of these flat, round objects hovering above the church. This particular spectacle absolutely terrified the men. But it wouldn't end there, because apparently over the course of the following days, these men would all become very sick, describing pain all over and uncontrollable shaking. Seeking aid for this mysterious illness, they met with many scholarly people who tried making sense of all of this, but they could not figure out what the cause of this strange illness that afflicted the men was. Ever since these sightings, and even reported sightings earlier than that, people have tried to figure out just what was seen back then. In these three cases, it's important to remember that these stories of these strange sightings are told secondhand, as none of the writers actually experienced it themselves. Which is understandable for the time, but it does make it more difficult to know exactly what was seen. That's the case for many historical events. Just like today, storytelling played a huge part of medieval life. The spoken word was very important, as it was the main source of information for many people. And much of that information came from the church, either through circulating news of historical events or just spreading the word of God. In addition to that, many significant events were told through illustrated scenes, which is one of the reasons why there are so many artworks from medieval times, because it was the easiest way to tell of something that reportedly happened. But these illustrations often used symbolism to tell whatever story or event that it wants to tell. And the reason for this is that people of the time had different levels of literacy. So the spoken word or illustrations were the easiest way to convey stories or messages and make sure that everyone received them. The messenger is almost as important as the message itself. For instance, the same event illustrated by different people might show or highlight completely different things. Now, I'm not bringing this up for no reason. This is actually criticism that's been aimed at the 1561 case specifically, to be even more specific, at Hans Glasser himself. Ever since this event reportedly happened, historians have been trying to figure out just what exactly happened and how much artistic license Glasser took in illustrating the event. Some historians have also pointed at some inaccuracies with the broadsheet. A writer for ufoinfo.de, which is a German platform for information and publications on UFOs, points to the fact that the broadsheet does not depict the famous castle, which has been a symbol of the city since the Middle Ages. He also points to a church depicted in the broadsheet, which is believed to be the Church of Saint Leonard, that has flaming orbs and smoke around it. That church had been destroyed in a fire in 1508, not 1561. Another post that criticized the messenger is a post on a site called Amusing Planet, which is from February 2020. According to this post, Hans Glasser had a bad habit of making unauthorized copies of prints that were made by other printers. so much so that he would even receive a warning from the city council for making illegal prints in 1558. He also allegedly had a habit of exaggerating and focusing on stories that were sensational. Still, this post does point out that it would be unfair to label him as a sensationalist, because even if he may have taken some artistic license with the stories he reported, there was usually a grain of truth to the prints that he made. For instance, he made a print that spoke of bearded grapes. This was later explained to be due to mold. So, a true story that was exaggerated somewhat. Because of that, the argument isn't so much that the 1561 sighting never happened, it's more a question of how much of it happened the way it's depicted. The one who brought the story to the attention of modern audiences is author Carl Jung, when it was mentioned in his 1958 book, Flying Saucers, A Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Skies. In the book, he theorized that the event was most likely a natural phenomenon, with religious or even military interpretations overlying it. He writes that the militaristic interpretation can be seen in some of the imagery, such as the tubes being cannons and the globes being cannonballs, going back and forth as an artillery engagement. He did also touch on the more religious or symbolic interpretations of the event. Similar arguments have been made for the 1566 sighting. A post on the Swiss National Museum regarding the Basel sighting follows that train of thought, that the leaflet or broadsheet that told of the sightings in Basel have a lot of religious undertones, and the faithful are urged to see the phenomena as a sign from the divine. This post also writes that this work, as well as other works, contains strong militaristic symbolism. It has also been theorized that the 1566 sighting could have been influenced or even inspired by the 1561 sighting. The sighting in 1665 is believed to have similar themes as the previous two. For instance, in 1670, lightning would strike the St. Nicholas or Nikolai church where the grey disc was seen hovering. On their site, the Staatliche Museen zu Berlin writes that an event such as that would have strengthened the belief that the celestial phenomenon that reportedly happened 5 years prior, in 1665, was a sign of God's wrath. Moving away from the symbolism of these events, if you believe that it is a natural phenomenon, the most common explanations for these sightings is something called a parhelion or a sundog. A sundog is an atmospheric optical illusion where the sun appears flanked by pillars of light in the sky. They are formed when light passes through Earth's atmosphere. To be more specific, it's when light passes through hexagonal plate crystals of ice in the upper parts of the sky. Basically, you have ice in the upper parts of the sky that acts like a prism, and light passing through it will create really odd effects to those of us that are looking at it from the ground. The site above Top Secret have a write-up with a more detailed explanation or theory for why the 1561 phenomenon in particular was most likely a sundog. It is the most famous of these three sightings, so naturally it has more theories written about it. In the text, the writer points to the red half-moon-shaped lines that moves behind or through the sun, and claims that a sundog would explain those lines. Like I said before, a sundog is like a prism, which means that depending on how the light refracts, there could be multiple colors seen. The writer also speculates that the orbs or globes seen during that event were in fact halos created by this sundog effect. When looking at a Sundog in history, there's one example that is often brought up, and that is an oil painting that depicts a halo display observed over Stockholm on the 20th of April, 1535. This painting, Vädersolstavlan, is not only the oldest depiction of Stockholm in color, the oldest Swedish landscape painting, possibly, but it is also the oldest depiction of a Sundog. Who commissioned this painting is unknown, but it is believed that it was a clergyman called Olaus Petri. The painting was painted during the time of Gustav Vasa, and Petri was said to be very critical of the man who would be king. So when the Sundog phenomena was seen over Stockholm, it was seen as a bad omen of coming dark days and political uproar. Of course, a Sundog is not the only natural phenomena that has been brought up as a possible explanation for these sightings. Many other theories have been made about this as well, such as fires from far away that were seen by the people in the cities, meteor storms that were seen moving through the sky. The simplest and frankly most amusing explanation for these strange sightings is that people were staring at the sun. Obviously, they would start seeing spots or strange orbs or colors. And let's not forget, there are the UFO connection. Interestingly enough though, opinions are actually split here too. There are people who believe that something was seen in the sky, and Glasser and the others of the time did not understand what they were seeing, so they tried to explain it the best way they could. And of course, there are those who take a more skeptical look at it, ultimately concluding that this broadsheet or pamphlet from back then didn't just report the events, rather they reported interpretations of these events. And because it was so long ago, there is no way for us to determine what the truth may be, or even what event was the basis for the report in the first place. As I mentioned back at the beginning, I did a video about this topic back in March 2022. One comment that I got on that video was that there were actually stories of people being abducted in the 1561 case, disappearing from one location and reappearing in another one. But this commenter offered no clarification of where they got that information, even when asked repeatedly. So when I was making this video and going over the old script, I remembered that comment. So I decided to actually take a look at it while making this video. I found nothing. No stories of any abductions back then that were related to any of these three events. Not even on German UFO sites like ufoinfo.de, which I would imagine would be the place for that type of information. As far as any write-up of these events are concerned, from what I could find at least, the broadsheet by Glasser and the pamphlet by the two Samuels are the only sources for the 1561 and the 1566 events. The 1665 incident is more murky in terms of a source. It was reported in German leaflets, but who wrote the report is unknown. That being said, I'm actually not ruling it out, because it's very possible that there are some retellings of these events that had added details like that. Not to mention the fact that stories of people in the past being taken by creatures they would call fairies or even angels do exist. I even have a video about one such story here on the channel. But in relation to these three events, there aren't any stories of any abductions that I could find. What we have are one single source. Stories like these are some of my favorites. Stories of strange things happening and people trying to make sense of it. People who were living at the time trying to make sense of what they were seeing using the context of the world as they knew it. And of course, people living in more modern times trying to make sense of what happened using the context of the world as they knew it. Stuff like that actually makes me wonder if sometime in the future people would look back at us and wonder what the hell we were doing. As I mentioned in the video, all three of these stories are told through either hearsay or second-hand accounts. And as I researched this video, I found it kind of ironic that Hans Glasser especially has been very criticized for interpreting the event and taking artistic license with how he depicted the event. And the reason I found it ironic isn't that what we do all the time when we try to make sense of something that happened? We are interpreting it. I mean, just look at all of the varying conclusions that people have drawn from what these events could have been. A message from God, a message from an entirely different entity altogether, a natural phenomena, or even those who believe that these events were either completely made up or heavily exaggerated. In the end though, we will never truly know what happened. We can only speculate or interpret. So with that in mind, what do you guys think happened? What do you think these events in the sky were? Hey everyone, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. The next planned video for the channel is actually a look at strange things seen in the sky further back in time. So stay tuned for that. I hope you all have an amazing day, night or evening or whatever it may be where you are. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care.